All right, welcome everyone. We're waiting for folks to join us this evening, but welcome and thank you for joining Women's Way for closing the gender wealth gap forum on our stories, our power, building solidarity through storytelling. Just for your information, when we refer to women, we mean trans and cis women and femme-identified people, which includes anyone who is not a trans or cis woman, but who identifies as feminine, and also those who identify as gender expansive, non-binary, and or gender non-conforming. Hello, everyone. As you're joining, I'm Diane Corman-Levy, the Chief Disruptor at Women's Way, and we are all delighted that you decided to spend the next 90 minutes with us on this beautiful summer day. While we wait for folks to sign on, I would appreciate you taking the poll located in the chat box. We want to know if this is the first time attending a Women's Way event. So please, if you could just respond to that quickly, that would be great. So today's forum is part of a year-long series whose purpose is to educate different stakeholders about the drivers of the gender wealth gap and action steps that each of us can take to help close the gender wealth gap. Since October 2020, we have conducted 16 forums that address different drivers of the gender wealth gap, such as strengthening the early childhood education sector, gender and racial disparities in healthcare, increasing access to affordable housing, promoting equity in grant making, and creating a more equitable tax code. Today's session, which I'm really excited about, focuses on the importance and power of narratives and how storytelling can build solidarity and help foster transformational change at the systemic level. You will hear from 4 amazing panelists, 3 of whom are fellows from our Narrative Change Fellowship Program, and 1 who is a facilitator, was a facilitator and instructor of the storytelling sessions. You will also have opportunities to ask questions to the speakers via the Q&A button located at the bottom of your screen, and we will do our best to answer as many of your questions as possible. But please ask your questions. We want to bring as much of your conversation, your thoughts into the discussion. Closed captioning is enabled. If you do not want to see closed captioning, you can click Hide CC at the bottom of your screen. The chat is also enabled, so please share your comments during the session. We'd love to see how people are reacting to what you're hearing, to foster more of a conversation among all of you, and to create a safer space for all of us to engage in honest and challenging discussions. We ask each of you to abide to the session norms located in the chat box. We will record the session and make it available for you to view again and for those who could not attend today's session. After the session, we will also send you a list of resources related to today's topic and a survey to evaluate the session. And we really encourage you to complete the survey because we take your feedback seriously, as we always are trying to improve the quality of these educational forums. Before we introduce you to these amazing panelists and moderator, Kelly Shear, the director of the Gender Wealth Institute, and I are going to spend about 10 to 12 minutes talking about the economic state of women and children, why Women's Way is investing the resources into addressing the gender wealth gap, and a high-level view of our theory of change for closing the gender wealth gap. So I'm just going to start presenting some slides right now. First, I want to just thank our session sponsors for today's session, with a special shout out to JP Morgan Chase and Company, who was our signature sponsor. Again, their support really helps us to be able to provide these sessions for free, so everyone has access to attend these sessions. Just real briefly, Women's Way, if you don't know about us, we are the Greater Philadelphia region's leading nonprofit organization dedicated to the advancement of women and girls and gender and racial equity. We were formed in the mid-1970s, and we hold a unique place in the nation's history as the first umbrella funding federation in the United States that was specifically dedicated to women's issues such as wage equity, rape crisis, domestic violence, reproductive freedom, and post-incarceration reentry. Just real briefly, the economic state of women, it wasn't great pre-COVID, and it certainly has not been great post-COVID. Just real briefly, 80% of workers in the United States are living paycheck to paycheck. Majority are women. 40% of adults are not able to cover an unexpected $400 expense. Again, many of them are women. And Philadelphia still has the highest poverty rate at just above 23% among the 10 largest cities. And when we talk about poverty rates, that's a family of 4 living who has a salary of $25,000 or less. I don't know how a family of 4 can even live off of $25,000. So even those above it I consider still not living in sustainable, with a sustainable income. And the region's largest demographic group living in poverty are women ages 25 to 34. Related to this, there's a retirement gap where 80% of women are likely to be living in poverty by age 65. And then the gender wealth gap, which is worse than the gender pay gap. So what is the gender wealth gap? The most current data shows that single white women own about 56 cents on the dollar compared to single white men. Hispanic women own 10 cents and non-Hispanic Black women only own 5 cents. And there's a lot of historical reasons for this in terms of 400 years of wealth extraction among people of color, particularly women of color. So if you then look at the US economic pyramid, you see that that 1% of the population holds 47% of the nation's wealth, and the bottom 80% only hold 9%. That is not a sustainable economic system. Right? And on many of the bottom 80%, many of them are include women, particularly women of color. And again, many of them were essential workers during COVID. So this is not a sustainable economic system at all. And actually this gap has gotten worse since COVID. And there's many reasons for that. So causes, why do we have a gender wealth gap? I mean, we'll talk about some of these. We have talked about them. They earn less than men, but even those for the same paying jobs, there's still a pay gap. They're more likely to be denied mortgages, even though they are better at paying back mortgages and loans than men historically. They're more vulnerable to predatory lending. Women, particularly women of color, are the fastest growing population in terms of getting college degrees, but they hold 2/3 of all student debt. And we had a whole session on that. And then there's occupational segregation, where fields dominated by women are often paid less and valued less in our country. And the thing we're going to talk about today are narratives that are grounded in white supremacy and how narratives play a role in really driving and sustaining the gender wealth gap. So when we think about closing the gender wealth gap, we need to talk about and answer the questions: how do we challenge and disrupt narratives that harm and devalue women, especially women of color? And what happens when we center the stories and experiences of those most impacted by systemic injustices and inequities? And we'll be talking about this in a very honest and inspiring way today. And so when we talk about wealth at Women's Way, it's not just the capitalistic definition of assets minus liabilities. We look at it much more broadly. It's about living and retiring with dignity, freedom, and peace of mind. It's about our communities being prosperous, resilient, and vibrant. We know that individual wealth is also connected to community wealth. We talk about future generations having the freedom to dream big. Many times when you're living paycheck to paycheck and you're in financial crisis every day, that's a privilege to be able to even dream big and dream about the future. And knowing that our family and networks and communities are healthy and spiritually whole and contributing to society. So we need a new normal, that requires a new bold vision for our economy that provides solutions to centuries of systemic exclusion and extraction and exploitation that have really undermined our economic potential in the United States. And so when we talk about inclusive economy, invest in women. All the research shows when we invest in women, we're investing in our economy. Women are the backbone of our economy. Women are the greatest determinants of social and educational outcomes. In fact, parental assets are the strongest predictors of children attending and graduating from college. And if we really decrease wage deficits and increase wealth opportunities, and we close the gender wealth gap, we could add $28 trillion to the global GDP by 2025. So empowering women is smart economics. So how are we doing this? And Kelly's going to talk a little bit more about this. We started something called the Gender Wealth Institute about 2 years ago. And our vision is really to close the gender and racial wealth gap in our region by advancing research and practical solutions that build wealth for women who are economically insecure. So it's about economic liberation. It's about all women being able to be able to fully engage in our economy, be able to contribute, dream big, live peacefully, retire peacefully, pass on wealth to the next generation. So it's a bold vision, requires bold action. So I'm going to pass this over to my partner in crime, Alicia.
All right, great. You can hear me well?
Yes.
All right, good. Okay, so I'm here to provide framing and context for the connection between white supremacy and the gender wealth gap. So why are we even talking about white supremacy? Because it's a tool used to create, maintain, and perpetuate all gender and racial inequities. It's the operating framework for how inequities work. Next slide. This slide provides an explanation of what white supremacy is and what it's there to do. Think of it like a tool. Next slide. White supremacy functions in a variety of systems. The common thread is the privileging of a constructed definition of whiteness and the dehumanization of all others. Whiteness becomes an asset. Take a minute to review how white supremacy shows up in various systems. Next slide. I'll also give a minute for you to read this slide and quote. It's important to know that white supremacy is not just a tool used by white people. Consider the three things white supremacy is here to do: justify dehumanization, hoard power, and disconnect and divide. Next slide. As it relates to gender injustices such as the gender wealth gap, we draw your attention to a concept known as racialized patriarchy. If white supremacy is the motherboard, racialized patriarchy is the specific code that enables the stratified exploitation of genders other than male. Think of it this way. White supremacy is how we get to a place where people other than white have deliberate unequal access, marginalized experiences, and diminished expressions of power. Racialized patriarchy is how we understand the continual interplay of race and gender in the expression of power. Next slide. Next slide, sorry. There we go. In racialized patriarchy, there's a process of racialization where people are separated and categorized by hierarchy for the purpose of privileging whiteness. At the same time, there is the promotion of the idea of a gender binary. Patriarchy is the use of a male-female binary to monopolize social, political, and economic power to privilege men. It's a system where cultural ideas about value are attributed to and played out through sex roles. It falsely claims that biology drives a common gendered experience. Racialized patriarchy takes the myths of racialization and gender binary to reinforce the goals of white supremacy. Next slide. Today, we will take a look at the significance of narratives in our work to remedy gender and racial inequities. Narratives are simply the stories we tell and the way we use those stories to make sense of the world. Narratives turn information into knowledge and meaning. They impact how we think, feel, remember, imagine, and relate. Next slide. When thinking about inequities, narratives feed the structure. Our work with narratives aims to shift the conditions that keep the problem in place. Next slide. When thinking about systems change, narratives meet us at the bottom of our upside-down pyramid. They take us from the collective efforts at the top to more internal work that forces us to contend with how we see the world, how we see each other, and what we uphold as truth. Next slide. Dominant narratives live in our subconscious and they're all around us. Ideas such as these are normalized, that is, taken to be essential truths and foundational for how we understand society to work. Assumptions like the ones listed here are not simply inconvenient or even absurd, they're absolutely life-threatening. We believe that liberation requires us to be clear on the scripts that we're running on. Next slide. While there is some work and discourse focused on how dominant narratives impact our relationships with each other, there's much less work focused on how dominant narratives impact our self-concept. Internalized oppression can be thought of as a learned or indoctrinated perspective that seeks to make sense of oppression. Two relevant examples are internalized misogyny and internalized racism. For internalized racism, that is the conscious or unconscious normalization of racialized power structures where history and white dominant culture are centered. Internalized misogyny is acceptance by marginalized genders of negative societal beliefs and stereotypes about themselves. After all, racism and misogyny absolutely have material, physiological, and psychological consequences that negatively impact how people see themselves. Cumulative and ongoing exposure to expression is a type of systemic violence and trauma. When you internalize oppression, you begin to embody the culture, measures of success, and power structures of the oppressors in an effort to make sense of its impact. Proximity to whiteness becomes a means of survival. One example of internalized oppression shows up through the use of respectability politics. The purpose of respectability politics is to manage the behavior of others in your group. It's a strategy focused on self-correction as a means of uplift. Dignity and worthiness are only conferred through right behavior, and members of the group are encouraged to rid each other of bad habits and customs. This may look like shaming women for dance styles such as twerking, or emphasizing the importance of respecting authority at all costs, or even having natural curly hairstyles. When the focus is on monitoring and controlling the behaviors of individuals, we enlist individual explanations to maintain the invisibility and normalization of oppression. Failures are seen as personal or as the collective negative attributes of the group. Then efforts are centered around transforming an individual rather than transforming conditions experienced by the marginalized group. Next slide. We prevent people from seeking institutional or systemic change, and we hamper the creative imagination of folks who bear the brunt of oppressive forces when we operate with respectability politics and internalized oppression. If I live in a world with a narrative that tells me I'm bad and wrong and structurally withholds safety, protection from harm, and basic resources, and then people in my group unleash their furious criticism and judgment on me for anything from what I say to what I wear, what do I start to believe about myself? And how does what I believe about myself affect my sense of hope for myself or my community? In this way, dominant narratives warp not only how we see each other and understand what's possible, but they also destroy our individual sense of power, agency, and humanity. Next slide. As always, we believe part of the work of liberation is to uncover the plot, that is, the intentions, actions, and outcomes. Next slide. So we're really pleased to have just wrapped up the third cohort of our Changing the Narrative Fellowship program, where we worked with dynamic students from Community College of Philadelphia to address individual and collective narratives and systems change work. We were also very, very lucky to be able to work with Love Now Media on our curriculum and just helping to facilitate our program. We're very lucky to have 3 fellows and our partner from Love Now Media to help us discuss this topic today. Next slide. First, please join me in welcoming our moderator, Alicia Atkinson, who will lead us through our discussion today. Welcome, Alicia.
Awesome. Thank you, Kelly and Diane. So appreciate being invited to moderate this discussion today. I have to say I'm just a massive fan of Women's Way and the work they do in community, so felt really honored to be invited here today. And yeah, narrative change work and the importance, as you know, Kelly and Diane just provided such beautiful framing to our discussion today. So I'm really excited to be here, really excited to facilitate this dialogue. And so I'm going to kick it off by just having each of the panelists briefly introduce themselves, maybe why they wanted to be on this panel today, maybe just how they're showing up today, anything they want to share about kind of who they are and how they're arriving in this moment. And so Syreeta, I would love to start with you. So I'll pass it to you.
Yeah, thank you. And definitely agree with the beautiful framing of this conversation. So hello, y'all. I am Syreeta Martin, Director of Programs and Communications for Love Now Media, which is an organization on a mission to help create a more just, well, and equitable future. And we're doing that by amplifying acts of love that are at the intersection of social justice, wellness, and equity. As for why I chose to be on the panel, that's super easy. There is no way in the world I'd miss an opportunity to hold space once again with some of the incredible fellows. Yeah, just no way. So it was an easy peasy yes for me.
Awesome. Thank you, Syreeta. And Ellie, can I pass it over to you to just share a little bit about yourself and how you're arriving today and why you're on this panel?
Sure. So I'm Ellie Fiera, pronouns she, her. I am one of the fellows from the Gender Wealth Gap Fellowship. I chose to be on the panel today because the experience that I went through during the fellowship was incredibly life-changing, and I wanted to share some of that with the broader world. I think it's incredibly important to share that with others, and I think I would like to think that I have a lot to say about it, but we'll get to that later.
Thank you so much, Ellie. And Christina, can you introduce yourself and
Okay, so hi everyone. My name is Christina Tsan. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm an art and design major here at CCP. I'm actually about to graduate pretty soon, and I wanted to be on this panel just because of similar feelings with Ellie. Like, I really think my life has changed positively ever since I joined the fellowship, and like I didn't think it would impact me like this much with my sense of self, and so I definitely really had to speak about it, and so I'm here.
Awesome. Thank you, Christina. And I'll echo the congratulations that was in the chat to almost graduating. So big accomplishment. And yeah, Nate, I'll throw it to you to also introduce yourself, why you chose to be on the panel, and anything else you want to share about how you're arriving today.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining. My name is Nate Fireall, pronouns they, she. I'm a second-year art and design student at CCP, and I joined this panel discussion today because I'm bad at goodbyes, so I like seeing everybody's face like over and over again. And also, I love talking about the fellowship and the experience that I had to like anybody who would listen. And then what better place than a specific platform to talk about it? So yeah, like a lot of personal values, a lot of passion, and a lot of revelations that like I went through during like the entire process, like the entire months that we've like started building a relationship with each other. So yeah.
Amazing. Thank you, Nate. And yeah, I'm gonna actually throw the next question to you, Nate, to start us off, kind of go in this reverse order. But do just want to remind folks that right now we'll have a little bit of a facilitated discussion. We have some prepared questions, but we're definitely gonna have some time for Q&A. So just a reminder, if questions pop up during our discussion in the next 30 minutes or so, feel free to put those in the Q&A function in Zoom. But yeah, as you all alluded to, it sounds like the fellowship program was pretty impactful. And I know we're going to bring everyone kind of back in time a little bit, but would just love to hear a little bit around why you chose to be a part of the fellowship program and kind of what is kind of still lingering with you today about kind of the big takeaways that you had and how it has being heard and kind of telling and developing your story in the way the fellowship program supported you. Yeah, and Nate, I'll start with you with that question if you're ready.
Of course. So this year, 2022-2023 was my first year returning to school after a 3-year hiatus. And I did, I think, a really good job for like my fall semester and just like getting back to like a schedule, just like the groove of being in school, I guess. So one day I was just like scrolling on my email and I was just like, oh, there's this like fellowship that's happening about like community building and storytelling. And during my hiatus, I tried to make a point to like curate and organize events for like the communities that I belong in, like the queer community and the, I'm so sorry, my cats are fighting, and the artist community. So reading that, I just felt like there was like an alignment because like the fall semester and like was ending and I'm like, okay, what do we do? Like, how do I continue this on my own personal passions? So I just applied and I mentioned like the stuff that I did and like what I'm interested in. And I could have never imagined that like, I feel like a lot of progress personally, and then just like a lot of takeaways that I feel like I would have never had if I didn't experience this. But then also reiterating things that I already believed about myself is just hearing it from people that never knew me and just wanted to support me just from like the short amount of time that we got to meet each other. So.
That's awesome. Thank you, Nate. And do you want to share a few of those takeaways at this time, or do you want to wait till later on? Or?
I can share a few. I guess the biggest takeaway is my story and my truth is mine. Like nobody will feel or see or hear what I felt. And the way that I voice that or the way that I express that to the world is important and it is valuable and it does have value. And centering like love within that and not like resentment or spite within that, but trying to, I guess, see the light at the end of the tunnel is like a really, it's just like, it really resonates with me. And I'm trying to take that through everything that I do, besides just like professional, just like making relationships with friends or like showing up for family or just showing up for myself. Like, yeah, that's to name a few.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Nate. And yeah, Christina, so can you share a little bit about kind of why you joined the fellowship program, maybe how you learned about it, and share a little bit about kind of the impact thus far about developing your story and going through the process.
Yeah, of course. So I remember like just checking my emails. I'm pretty good at checking my emails daily. And so I just, saw this opportunity. And at first, like one of my biggest goals, right, is to be able to transfer to another institution after CCP and also be able to get a bachelor's degree without having to take on any student debt. Like I'm terrified of debt, so I was trying to work hard alongside doing school to like make money. And at first the fellowship like appealed to me because like $5,000 and talking about social justice, when that has been like something I've cared about like for a couple years now. I was like, yeah, this sounds like right up my alley. And so I applied. I felt like I fit the criteria really well. And then I also I did like my research on Women's Way and the previous cohort of fellowships. And I was like, I don't see anyone my age or anyone who's aging yet. So I'm gonna be the first. And so that's what I went into applying with. I was like, yeah, I feel like I have some insights unique to my identity that I feel like would be good to contribute to the group. And I'm extremely happy I was able to get in. And in fact, I even applied in the first place because, like I said before, this fellowship has changed my life so well, so amazingly. I don't even know where to begin. So first of all, I got my first internship ever through this fellowship because I believe it was Someone on Slack, I forget who, someone posted an internship opportunity. I applied, had an amazing time. Okay, so I got that. I got the bag afterwards. Okay, still. But anyways, on a personal level though, I got more confident. Um, I got more confident with sharing like my voice and gaining the confidence to like be more a part of stuff, because I was very like keep to myself. Like before I was in this fellowship, I was very much, you know, go to school, do my classes, get good grades, go home. That's it. I didn't really have any plans to like do anything outside of that, have any extracurriculars, because I just wasn't that confident about it. And like reflecting on me now, I'm like such a different person than I was in high school, because in high school I wasn't a part of anything and I always felt really bad about I have like zero accomplishments under my belt, like what have I done? But now it's like I'm a part of this fellowship and I've grown so much as a person and have like feel like I always feel like I'm more mature than a lot of other people my age, but I think especially now because I've been able to sit around people who've experienced much different lifestyles to me, which is always really a really good experience to hear, because, you know, it's one thing to hear a narrative about people on the news or whatever. It's a totally different thing to have someone knowing that they lived that experience and telling their story to you. That is super eye-opening.
Thank you so much, Christina. And Ellie, can you share a little bit about why you joined the fellowship program and kind of the impact it's had on you to date, and anything else you want to share that maybe Christina and Nate also mentioned? Yeah.
So a lot of my background went in a pretty similar way. I guess like my fellows know a little bit more about like the extended version of the backstory, but I guess like the shortened Cliff's Notes version of it is that when I first came to CCP, that was like me attempting to start a new life. I had just moved to Philly. I just, you know, started this, I had had a pretty long past of like disappointments, I guess, like, you know, not living up to my potential. That's how I would describe it. And like me coming to Philly, coming to CCP was me deciding, okay, I gotta take a shot and like really try to make something of my life and like really like live up to my potential, because, you know, through various circumstances, some being of my fault and some not being of my fault, like, you know, things hadn't really worked out for. So within the first few semesters of CCP, I performed pretty well. And like by last December, I was kind of riding a high of like pretty good performance in classes, you know, doing pretty well. I had just received another scholarship and I was scrolling through my emails, just like Nate mentioned, and like I saw the email from CCP about the Women's Way Fellowship. I saw that there was an honorarium attached, and at the time, like, you know, I was just sitting there like, okay, like that's nice. Like let me take a look into this. Like let me see, like what I can get out of this. And like when I you know, I interviewed, got the fellowship, and if I have to be honest, within the first few like sessions of the fellowship, like, you know, the first one or two sessions of the fellowship, it was like, it was really kind of a routine thing for me. It took me a moment to hit that stride where I realized, wait, this is something that is like very meaningful deeply to me. This is something that like really means a lot to me, and that like I'm really, really happy that I'm here. And that is kind of like, it kind of went from there, right? I was a little almost taken aback by surprise at like how much this fellowship ended up meaning to me. So yeah, and this also was my last semester at CCP. I have transferred out to Temple now, so there's that. But really, I think like in the healing process and like coming to terms with like my own past and like, you know, what I'm capable of, what I have done and things like that. This fellowship did a lot to like both allow me to forgive myself and to feel responsibility for myself at the same time, and put me in a position where I feel like I can succeed in the future, built off of past successes.
That's awesome. Thank you, Ellie. And yeah, congratulations for transferring to Temple. It's really exciting. And yeah, thank you all for sharing that. I feel like it's nice to hear kind of like even how you've heard about it and kind of the process for even determining if you wanted it. And then Ellie, what you said about kind of like, it took you a few sessions to even realize what you're going, that resonates a lot with me. I feel like I found myself in certain things in my life where I'm like, whoa, this is something, you know, like this is something. So thank you all. So the next question is actually related to some of the content that Kelly shared at the beginning of our session here. So thinking about kind of narrative's role in shaping our mental models, shaping how power is held in our society and in our culture. And really this idea that, you know, certain groups are focused on undermining and devaluing others to benefit themselves. And so would love to hear from each of you around kind of what narratives have you really heard or maybe that you unpacked in this fellowship that are harmful and devaluing of women, especially women of color, and kind of thinking about your own personal reflections through that process. It sounds like part of that healing and inner work is really coming to terms with, again, stories that are told about us time and time again. So yeah, Ellie would love to actually kick it off with you if you're ready. So just any reflections on kind of these narratives that harm and devalue women, especially women of color, and kind of your relationship with those harmful narratives through this process or beyond.
I guess the best part that where I want to lead off with is this was something that Kelly mentioned earlier, the narrative of like pulling yourself up by the bootstraps, you know, every single thing is your own responsibility. And like it even comes back to like, you know, the like everyone is equal idea. That is something that can be both a positive thing, but also a very harmful narrative if you start with the idea that everyone is equal, because in reality, people aren't actually equal. People don't actually all have the same capabilities or like, you know, or you know, they don't have the same capabilities. That doesn't mean that they're less valuable human beings. And I should rephrase this. That doesn't mean that they're less valuable human beings, because your internal sense of values or how you value others should not be based on their achievements or their capabilities. It should be based on people's innate worth as a human being. So I think when you start from that idea that everyone is equal, you end up in a position where you can look down on others for their lack of being able to achieve the same thing. You know, someone who is born, like, you know, a cis white male who was born into like a wealthy family and had, you know, was sent to say, you know, had their like Harvard education paid for by their parents or whatever, and like, you know, was able to like get all the like advantages in life and like everything. That's not, by the way, to like shame any particular education or anything like that, but someone who like had all those advantages, had like, you know, a small loan of $1 million from their parents, is not coming from the same like background, the same level of capability as someone who has had to struggle their entire life just to put food on the table. And you know, there's actual scientific evidence into this, that like the kind of nutrition that you receive as a child can affect, you know, I don't want to suggest that IQ is a good measure of intelligence, but it can affect how you score in IQ scores and things like that. So like, I think that is one of the ways in which it can be so like that's a narrative that can be very harmful, that like paradigm of thinking when you're coming from the idea that like a human being's value, a person's value is based on their accomplishments, and everyone's equal in terms of like what they're capable of. I think that that's something that's so harmful.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Ellie. And I think like I was reminded, I feel like I see this thing on the internet, but it's like you aren't what you produce, right? Like that decolonizing our mindset against like you have to produce to be valuable, right? And then similarly on the note of like, you know, I think college is such an interesting example of like the conditions that are around college access and college, you know, do you have to go into debt, massive amounts of debt? Do you have to work multiple jobs while you're in college, you know, and all these things around that versus just like the piece of paper, you know, the degree at the end of it. But there's all these conditions around it. I think what you're speaking to around those opportunities.
Absolutely. And if I can
Yes,
extrapolate a
please.
little more, it's like this is something that I've definitely like run into in the past, where like I'm fortunate because I'm over 25 and am considered a independent student on the FAFSA that qualifies me for significantly large amount of need-based financial aid. But like the way that FAFSA is set up under the assumption that anyone under 25 needs to get money from their parents. And not everyone is in a position, I would even say almost no one is in a position where they can just get that kind of money from their parents with no strings attached and be able to pursue the future that they really want to look for. And, you know, in terms of college admissions, there's definitely like at the very, very high tier of colleges, they do offer pretty incredible need-based financial aid. I'm sure if someone if you're willing to look it up, like a lot of these Ivy League universities and universities of the same tier have a policy that they cover 100% of your financial need. But with such stringent admission standards, you know, that sort of education is not available to everyone, and it essentially means that anyone who can't get into like that Ivy League university might not be able to attend college at all, and it's like that's a huge problem because college is a huge predictor of future economic success. And like, you know, I did say earlier that while a human being's value is not based on their economic success, economic success is what sets you up to have a comfortable and safe, secure life. So it's still something that's incredibly important for everyone to be able to achieve.
100%. Yeah. Thank you for like fine tuning that point. I think that's really powerful. Nate, love to hear your thoughts or responses to what's already been shared just around these kind of narratives, harmful. We kind of talked about the bootstrap one. If there's other ones around really harming and devaluing women, especially women of color, and kind of, yeah, the unpacking of those harmful narratives and maybe, yeah, the reflection again on the fellowship.
Yeah, of course. I feel like they all will intersect with each other at some point, but ones that instantly come to my mind is in certain rooms, I shouldn't be the loudest in the room. And the fact that I am a Black woman, I will have to do everything 3 times harder compared to white, cis, or even other people of color who are in the same spaces as me. I feel like that's very harmful and also stigmatizes an abundance of people, which I think also would fuel into like the mindset of like the providing of like how much you work is equating to your value in the world. So I guess in relation to myself, when I would think like, maybe I should not say something right now, even though I feel very passionate about this, or maybe someone will look at me different because I already look in a, like present myself as different. So I shouldn't be too much. So in order to get some type of reaction, I feel like that also devalued my opinions, that like took away from like showing up for myself and as well as other people. And then when the rhetoric of being a Black woman and working hard, I feel like that devalues like coming from a household with like a single parent or a household with a single parent and then including a step parent and raising Black children, love, like showing what joy is and love is, and teaching like lessons and teaching just skill sharing, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So when I went to CCP my first initial year, I did really well. Like I got all A's, but in my brain, I was overworking myself so much and I still didn't feel like I was good enough. And one day I was just like, if the amount of work that I put in, I was so determined to get this type of achievement, I could do this without being in school. And I feel like I could also like teach other people without being in school. So I dropped out of school just to not destroy my body, not destroy my mind, I think, and just to be like, I'm not what people assume of me, if that makes sense. This also goes into like the narrative of me being a sex worker. I started sex work at 17, and that fueled basically my living for until this fellowship actually, and when I returned into school actually. So the narrative about people who engage in erotic labor, or the narrative of them being like an undesirable in society and unneeded and unnecessary, it made me start to have a lower self-worth of myself, even though I knew I was doing it in order to connect, if that makes sense, in order to preserve and restore my passions and what I care about. So when I dropped out of school, I feel like I was telling myself, you are not what these acronyms are. You are not what these boxes were filled already in for you. What like media has shown me of like, oh, this is going to be like a case for the worst case scenario. I feel like I defied all of that. Like, I feel like my story does not fit just one set type of experience. I feel like it kind of can mesh into so many other type of labors, and just basically the attachment to the mind, body, and the spirit. And I feel like me coming back to school, joining this fellowship, was reiterating for me that like rest is valid. Like I can do that. Like I don't have to work a 9 to 5 and it completely destroy my mental health, my physical health. I can still achieve all that I want to achieve. It's just if I take the time and know my own body and know my own self beforehand, do the shadow work beforehand, and then I could, I guess, share it and find the love within all of that, to say the least. So narratives definitely, like, I'm very opinionated and very loud. I was very mute, antisocial when I would analyze a room. And I saw that just because of how I presented myself and how I looked. So I undervalued myself. I would look and undervalue other people, and I would automatically overvalue a person based off of like their types of, how they present. If they're talking to the teacher a lot or whatever, I'd be like, oh, they're going to be good. They'll be good. And I feel like I was always doing that in order to be unseen. But I knew that I wanted to be seen so badly because I care and I want to archive and preserve so many different like experiences of life. It was just me telling myself like, I'm just going to have to get up and do it, but how? So.
Thank you so much for sharing all that. You just said so much that I think obviously resonated. The chat's kind of blowing up with a lot of what you shared, and I reminded of this kind of simplicity that white supremacy kind of puts us all. I think you were kind of saying even like sharing your story, you were like even the narratives were getting repeated back into you, even though they were like authentic parts of yourself that like again the world was reflecting back to you kind of in this negative way. So I just think it's really beautiful. And Christina, I'd love to bring your voice into this question, just around kind of this idea of these harmful and devalued, these narratives that devalue women, especially women of color, and kind of the impacts that these narratives have had on you. And I would love to hear from you.
Yeah, I would say my experience with negative narratives about women of color come from a unique standpoint, I guess, just because of the time period I grew up in. So like for backstory, I like my middle school, not that many Asians, like Asians were a minority. So like I experienced a lot of bullying. It was even worse for my brother. And then my parents, my family, like, you know, I kind of wish I had like that kind of like mom that would like, you know, the second they hear of bullying for you, they like stomp up into the classroom and is like, I'm gonna sue the school. That is not what happened. Um, I told, you know, I think I felt at the time because my mom, she's not like super fluent in English, and my family, like they're immigrants. Like it was kind of like I had to like fend for myself. I had to either fend for myself or pray the teachers will do something about it. And thankfully, in my experience, most of the time I told the teachers like they would help out, but it was like even worse for my brother because he was a guy. And so like I think the bullying at my school, it was worse for guys than it was for girls, because I think, or maybe I just lucked out with the teachers, but my experience of bullying compared to my brother, like even though we both faced like anti-Asian like racism and like all these microaggressions, like he had it worse because like he had a teacher that would just tell him to ignore it instead of like actually doing something. And me, when I was dealing with it, I tried to ignore it a lot. But so the point of me like bringing that up is because I had a lot of internalized racism and internalized misogyny that I had to get out of in my like early days of childhood. Like, you know, once I made that transition from middle school to high school, like it was hard. I didn't have a lot of like strong Asian role models, I guess, to look up to. And I didn't ever really see like the value or the point of having role models. At that age, I was like, oh, well, who cares? But I think now I realize, I think my early life could have been a lot more different if I did, you know, have actual representation of me in the media. And it wasn't like just Mulan. Like like Mulan was like literally like that one Disney princess, like that's it. But even then Mulan isn't even a good story because the story isn't totally like accurate, and it has a lot of like stereotypical stuff in it because it was written by white men. So but let me not get into all that. Anyways, so because I didn't have like a strong Asian woman role model for me at that age, I felt like I was very easily convinced of like white supremacy narratives and like buying into and feeding into more internalized racism that I would like learn off from the internet because I had unrestricted like access to the internet. And so, you know, I'm just like, I'm on YouTube, and then all of a sudden I'm like, I randomly get feminist gets destroyed, SJWs, whatever, like YouTube videos getting recommended on my YouTube page. And like that led into like I like why like someone my age like in high school, like I have no business being around people who are like on far right politics, like spokespeople for far right politics. I don't like, I'm not supposed to be here, but I ended up being there just because I was really into gaming at that time. And so a lot of gaming YouTubers around this time, like it's very easy. It was somehow very easy for like the YouTube algorithm. Like you go from like gaming YouTube videos, and all of a sudden I'm like watching Ben Shapiro talk about why women shouldn't get abortions or something. And I didn't even like really understand most of what was like what was being said in terms of politics. But, you know, at that age, I feel like I like to call it, I think you call this like the alt-right pipeline. But like basically through these like social media algorithms, like you get fed these like really nasty stuff. And I think in my heart, like I never like believed any of the bull crap they were saying at first, but like the more I watched it, the more I was like, yeah, I guess this kind of makes sense, whatever. And so I had to like do a lot of, and it was worse because I have another friend and they are Black, trans, and non-binary, and they had a lot of also internalized issues within themselves. And so we're both watching this content at our young ages and feeding into it, and then like feeding into it when we talk to each other, which like made it so bad. But then, you know, thank God, like we got out of it because we had these, we always like talked and had these like mature conversations, talking about like what we watched and what we consumed and why it didn't feel right. Like I'm talking like this content is normalizing saying slurs to me. And so like I literally like thought it was acceptable to let people call me slurs. So I really like, this is why like narrative change means a lot to me, because I really know what it's like to not be surrounded by positive narratives about yourself and feed into terrible, racist, misogynistic, like terrible narratives about yourself and other people, and like growing out of it. And like what it took to get me to grow out of it and all that stuff. And yeah, so that was a lot, but I guess to like wrap it up, I would say, guys, please do not let your children have unrestricted internet access. You can't blame my parents too much because they were immigrant parents and not very technologically adept. But I'm just really happy, at least now, because I've grown out of it. And also like, I think we are not where I think we should be, but we're making strides. I'm seeing more and more positive representation come out for people like me, like specifically with Turning Red, that movie. I really loved it. We do not get to see a lot of movies out there with just average teenage Asian girl doing average teenage things like that isn't like Euphoria like. You know what I mean? So that's what I have to say about that and narratives.
That's great. Thank you so much, Christina. And thank you for sharing that, because that was a lot to unpack. And it really, I think it was a really important point to bring into this room, into this conversation. And I actually would love to bring Syreeta's voice into this moment, just to, you know, again, thinking about media, thinking about the internet, you know, this is obviously something you're very passionate about. So any reactions you have to any question that we've already kind of gone through and shared, but also, yeah, just would love to hear about any reflections you have about working with the fellows in this process. And yeah, anything that else is top of mind has been stirred up today.
Yeah, no, in this moment, feeling super appreciative for the questions that you asked, because I feel that they really just gave space for the nuance and the brilliance and the depth of the stories that we got to experience, and that we got to help them tell, that some of what you all are hearing today. And needless to say, this is why I said earlier, like, it was a no-brainer to be on this panel, because I know who I'm on this panel with. I know the stories. or at least some of the stories, because I don't know their entire life journeys, but I know I got to hold incredibly beautiful and courageous space with them. And I watched Nate, Ellie, and Christina specifically evolve over months. And it like as much as the time together, I want to say like the days were long, the time was short. It really was this opportunity to evolve in real time together. So that's just some of what I'm feeling in this moment. But the narrative fellowship, Change the Narrative Fellowship program overall for me was really a full circle moment. The systems in Philadelphia greatly shaped my experience as a Pittsburgh native who arrived in Philadelphia by way of Delaware. And when I got here, did so as a teen mom. So it was my pursuit of higher education that brought me here, that system that really provided what I viewed as a doorway to opportunity. And my dream at that time was to attend Temple University, and thanks to their offering of family housing, I was able to fulfill that dream while living on campus with my two daughters. And over the years, I experienced great economic insecurity. The figure, I believe Kelly mentioned earlier in her slides, of like $400, that for me, I remember living off of that a month. For myself and my two daughters. And, you know, when I think back on that now, my eldest daughter is 18, my youngest is 14, I'm 35. And when I think back to like, you know, wow, we really were living off of $400 a month. How did I do that? How do we have systems that even make that the case? But I learned a lot about how systems can impact one's story, spirit, and potential success. So it really was a privilege to work with and coach the fellows alongside Josh Duncan Ashe, who is the Love Now Media founder, executive producer, and publisher. I think it definitely fed a fire within me that started with my journey over 18 years ago. And it fueled a lot of the life skills curriculum design and facilitation work that I did across the city. And that was work that was born of necessity, but also that I was inspired to do because of folks, for example, like now State Representative Jamie Gauthier, who during my time at Temple, I enrolled in 2006, I believe, yeah. I want to say within the next 2 years or so, she brought this organization and this initiative called Mommy Grads to Temple University's campus when I was a student there. And it was for, you know, students who were parents, who were mothers, and it provided such great resources and community within a system where we were really overlooked, which was interesting because Temple started as a school for non-traditional students, as a night school. But as far as insights, I think the greatest was that we as a society have come so far, yet we really do have a ways to go, y'all. The work that's being done though, the partnerships and resources that are being cultivated and leveraged through the Change the Narrative Fellowship program is phenomenal, period, hands down. It gives me hope. It personally affirms our mission at Love Now Media and our work around narrative ownership and justice, because I think it is a lot like some of what Christina was speaking to, the power of change, right? Before there's change in the world, there first has to come a change to your world. And it's actually in Parable of the Sower, Octavia Butler wrote, all that you touch, you change. All that you change, changes you. The only lasting truth is change. And then she goes on to write that God is change. And I would just personally add that you are change. And so changing the narrative, I believe, changes the necessary, right? It changes the things that we really need to see change, the systems, the realities, the constructs, the layers of what it means to be, or what it's like to be a spiritual being having a human experience. And so I think this work that we got to do with the fellows that we got to be a part of, it was the most outer body, inner body experience possible. Like and I can only speak for myself, you could not come to that session without at some point stepping outside of yourself, stepping outside of all that, all your layers of protection and security and, all the things that felt very safe and safe to the point of confined, like that restrict your evolution, right? It was really hard, I think, even for me to not show up in the fullness of my humanity. And I really commend the fellows because they did. And to Ellie's point, I saw some, it was like over time, over the course of sessions, but that's the reality that's to be expected because trust is earned. And I think that's something that Joss and I are very clear on, is that there is no real work without trust. And we have to earn that trust. And we do that by showing up consistently every day, by demonstrating every single time that we're in session, out of session, that this is a safe space. So yeah, I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Syreeta. And thank you for bringing Octavia Butler's voice into this room. I think that's really powerful. And yeah, I'm just struck by, even on this webinar today, just the nuances and the different stories that are represented, and think about, who's running our systems and institutions. It's these very one binary, older white men stories, and how we all need to, start filling rooms and voices with different stories. And so I think you spoke to too, like the internal work and the external work. And so I do, now that our time is quickly getting away from us here, but do want to kind of bring a question more to kind of the systems level change. So that water of systems change that Kelly introduced, this idea of mental models, doing that inner work, but really the goal is to influence, resource flows, programmatic decisions, policies. So Ellie, I'm going to start with you. Actually, would love to hear kind of, through this fellowship or anything else that you've heard today that you want to share around the importance of kind of people who are most impacted by these systems, really being at the forefront of these conversations around policy, and how do we really start fighting, these injustices and inequities with this narrative work, and yeah, anything else you also want to reflect on at this moment.
So definitely something that I have personally observed a lot from people is this sort of savior mentality that I've seen from people, where they, so to give an example, I have often run into people who have had wealth through, financial wealth through whatever reason or another, who will say something like, I am going to I'm going to become a landlord so I can provide affordable housing to others. And it's not always a point that I'll sit there and argue with them about, because sometimes it's just not the time. But whenever I hear that, it's so apparent to me that you cannot solve a system through a savior, through engaging in that system. You cannot solve a system of exploitation. You cannot fix a system of exploitation by partaking in that system of exploitation for profit. And it's something that I find that some people really struggle with. They don't think about how the people who are affected by these systems might feel, they think about what they can do to make themselves feel better, to give themselves like a little pat on the back. And I think that that's kind of an example of that, because at the end of the day, one of the big barriers to housing in the United States, in fact, the entirety of the world under capitalism, is the fact that we treat housing as an asset. It's like a utility. It's like something that you like, buy and sell and flip and invest in and something like that. And it's not treated as a utility, as something that you just need to have to survive, despite the fact that you need to have it to survive. And I find that like that is one of the big issues with not centering the narratives of people who are exploited or affected by these systems, and rather thinking about things from a self-centered standpoint, where you're approaching problem solving from the standpoint of what can I do, because that's how you can end up in that position where you can like almost have good intentions, but really at the same time you almost don't, because you can't, I mean, like I said, like you're engaging in an exploitative system for profit. And I think that's it can lead to some very dangerous scenarios when you have the savior mentality, and then you end up being wronged by someone, like say like one of your tenants doesn't pay rent on time. Like, I think 99% of the people who I would have heard say something like that, like I'm going to provide housing by becoming a landlord and providing cheap housing, they're going to break when someone doesn't have the money to pay rent on time. They're going to break when they have to actually take a loss because of someone else's poverty. And I think that that's kind of the big issue. Everyone wants to feel good about uplifting others, but no one wants to lose anything themselves. And that's, you can't, there, to some extent, it can be a zero-sum game where, some of the wealth does have to be redistributed from the wealthy to those who aren't wealthy in order for everyone to have a share of wealth.
Yes. Nate, can I throw the question to you around the importance of centering those who are oppressed in these systems work and systems change? And I also might fold in a question just around, well, no, actually, I'm not going to do that. I just would love to hear your response to that.
Yeah. So I always first advocate for the decriminalization of sex work and advocacy for it. Within that, I feel like the systems that need to be reformed is the judicial system, the police system, housing, prioritizing harm reduction. When I say harm reduction, I mean drug and alcohol, disabilities, as well as mental health. And I think to speak on more what Ellie was saying, I also agree that like the wealth needs to be taken from the wealthy and redistributed back to the community. And I firmly believe in like community funded housing. When I say that, I mean by like city council members, government official organizations that have the expendable income to rent out one of these properties that are being overtaken by like neighborhoods that are underdeveloped, and then being racked up 3 times the amount, basically pushing people out that have been there for years and leaving them with no options besides doing things that are seen as harmful or undesirable. I feel as though the standardized testing system needs to have reform. The pipeline between getting a proficient or a basic or below basic on the PSSA or SAT to the fact of if you could get into an Ivy League college or a community college or no college at all, because I feel like everyone has value if they want to learn. Like the statement, ignorance is bliss, isn't said for no reason. It's just, will people take the initiative to have, if they have access to it, will they be receptive to it? And I feel as though they will be. Basically to speak back on when I was saying like I chose to stay in school, I chose to leave school, but then I also chose to go back into school. That was easy for me. I had the privilege to do that, but it's not the same case for anybody else because of personal walks of their life that lead them to that. And I feel like it should be easily accessible to everybody. Yeah, I would just speak onto that, I guess. Safer policies for non-binary and trans people, specifically trans women and men of color. Yeah, I'm so sure that there's a whole list I could just, but yeah, specifically inner city and the city of Philadelphia. I feel like there can be a lot of love, care, and nurturing in almost every system, the pothole system. I don't know.
Awesome. So we do have some questions coming in that I do want to make some time and space for, but we can go backwards and forwards if this is when the conversation might get a little wild. So, but yeah, there's a few questions that maybe would be great to hear from you all on, or from a few people, just around you all continuing your experience with the fellowship. And Syreeta, I think I would love to hear from you as well, just like what you're thinking about continuing on based on this. But yeah, how you all maybe are getting involved in the systems change work that you're speaking about. It sounds like some of you are already involved. And then yeah, there's another question about any career changes. We did hear about a few maybe folks moving on to other institutions and so forth. But yeah, does anyone want to just share kind of how you're thinking about continuing this journey now that this phase of the journey is over? Yeah, Syreeta, I saw you came
I
up.
was gonna say, I'll hop in because mine will hopefully likely be the shortest.
Yeah.
We're gonna do what we've been doing. The work honestly continues. Love Now Media's first work is and has been based on Joss Duncan Ashe's curriculum, which is titled Designing Love. And that came out of her many years of engaging in social justice, advocacy, and arts-based storytelling work. So that said, especially for us, specifically safety and storytelling is just non-negotiable. And I think we're very much aware of the inequities that exist and the role that narratives, the power that narrative holds when it comes to shaping policy, when it comes to shaping perspective, when it comes to shaping our daily reality. And so I think our multimedia work, our workshop and curriculum work, all of those things, I mean, y'all, we're gonna keep doing what we've been doing. So feel free by all means to let folks know about the work we're doing, because the goal is to grow and to make sure that we continue.
Thank you, Syreeta. Anyone else want to share about kind of what they're thinking about next, or where they're thinking about taking this work that they did in the fellowship? Yeah, go ahead, Nate.
I just want to brag about like an internship that I started in June with a nonprofit called Prevention Meets Fashion. Basically, they use fashion as a way to talk about gender-based violence. And I'm a sex work prevention intern, which means that I advocate for sex work and I do outreach for local sex workers in the city. So I feel like the fact that I was in this fellowship also gave me, because just to preface, I'm scared of a lot of things. I'm paranoid of a lot of things. And me being scared and paranoid gets me, it makes me like not start things, for example. So the fact that I applied to the fellowship, the fact that I applied to the internship related to social justice, social work, I feel like that's just speaking to like a deeper, I guess, path that like I'll probably go on. But in general, I'm a visual artist and I love the idea of storytelling through the senses. Right now, I'm trying to write a grant with the Leeway Foundation, the Art and Change grant, trying to plan an exhibition related to like bedrooms and fostering love and care and empowerment, self-discovery within the curation, the personal curation of bedrooms, because I feel like that also could play into personal narratives too. I just feel like it's a cool thing to explore based off of the workshops that I have experienced through the fellowship. So yeah, that's my continuation, I guess.
Thank you, Nate. And I do want to like lift up something that you mentioned before and just mention again, because we didn't really get to talk a lot about like counter narratives, and you've mentioned love a lot, which has really resonated with me about like really centering love in your life, small, big ways. And I just think that's really, really beautiful.
Thanks to Love Now Media. I was a very angry person, a very volatile person. And I feel like growing up, be like, oh, Nate's mean, or Nate's very confrontational, or this, because I was trying to get my opinion across. But there's a way to do that. And if I'm coming from a sentimental place of love, which Joss and Syreeta basically like poured into me, like, I don't know, I just want to carry that and just like teach that to other people in like any way that I can, honestly.
Thank you.
Yeah, wow. Okay, cry.
Ellie, I want to pass it to you. I know you wanted to respond to this question too.
So to me, like when I had come back to school, like one of the big things that I wanted to do was I'm a CS major, but I also wanted but also data science as a minor. And my intention was to get into the business of essentially data science and using that in the field of not necessarily urban planning specifically, but rather in like systems planning, political planning, and things like that. I think that can be something that's very important to a lot of, or very, it can provide a useful perspective, because as a data scientist, what you're essentially doing is presenting data to people and interpreting it in a way that can help them make informed decisions. I think there's some danger at looking at data without the lens of humanity and love, and without like an informed like approach to it. And what I hope to do is bring to my field that love and that human-centric approach, and that, you know, that understanding of the human condition that can be very necessary when it comes to interpreting data, because I think it can be very dangerous to take simple numerical figures at face value without the angle of interpretation, and without like understanding what they actually mean, and considering things like the human experience, or like why things might be the way they might be. Hopefully I'm not being too generic in how I am giving an example, but that is like probably the biggest thing that I have taken from this fellowship that I hope to implement in my career down the road. That understanding of what wealth is and how it can influence data and statistics.
Yes, we should talk, Ellie. Okay. Very interested in that. We have really bad data on wealth. I mean, we just have really bad data. It's a problem. So I'm realizing that this is probably going to be our last kind of question to you all. I'm going to combine Monica had one, and then we also had one kind of prepared for you all, just to kind of end our session today on just, you know, you all kind of reflected on what you might be doing next, either in your careers or kind of personally what you're centering. But we did want to make space for like a call to action for folks. You know, we have funders on the call, we have policymakers on the call, we have maybe practitioners who work in social service spaces, so kind of a broad audience. But what do you feel like, and Monica did it very well, but what do you feel like is the most powerful, impactful way to really change the narrative in community and larger society, maybe with these audiences in mind? And I think we probably have time for everyone to mention like one thing. I know there's probably many, like there's no silver bullet here. But if everyone can kind of share their favorite thought that's kind of coming to them right now around, you know, people on this call really, you know, wanting to move this work forward in partnership with you all, what should they do? What's the first step? Does anyone want to go first?
I guess I'll go ahead and
Yeah,
and
thanks,
go first
Ellie.
real quick. Yeah. So like I guess part of it is like having some humility and staying humble and understanding like some of the privilege that you may hold coming into this, if that makes sense. That we really like, I know you literally used this terminology earlier, but we need to center the voices of people who are affected by these systems in order to really have an informed approach in regarding how we deal with the systematic problems that we see.
Thank you. Anyone else ready or want to go around just a call to action for folks?
Yeah, I can go.
Thanks, Christina.
I would say I think it's definitely important to work on yourself before working with like other people. Like I would say I'm a really big believer in like you can only help other people after you've helped yourself. You gotta have room in your cup before you gotta have like a filled cup before you can fill other people's cup. If I could say. And to keep this short, like if you like really believe in something and you want to see that change, you got to be that change yourself. And then eventually, you know, birds of a feather will flock together and you will find people who also really believe in that cause and everything you stand for. And that adds up and you end up making a difference, really.
Thank you so much, Christina. Nate or Syreeta, yeah, go ahead.
I guess I would say to center humanity with the work, and then for the relationships of funders who have, I guess, fundees, to practice the skill of observing and experience without judgment. Because I think that's a thing that I'm learning myself, is just to look at something without putting a this is bad, this is bad, this is horrible, this is offensive, and analyze why the judgment is there, and then have a conversation about that if it is warranted. But I feel like a lot of bridge making, skill sharing, and fostering community could come through that. So yeah, observing without judging.
And I'm intentionally going last because I want to make it clear that my call to action is to listen to everything every single fellow just said here, and then actually act on it. I'm not sure which funders or, you know, it's funders of specific things, but for the Change the Narrative Fellowship Program, please see the impact of this program. See the impact of the partnerships that it has led to. For Love Now Media, it's been an absolute honor and privilege to be able to help empower Nate, Ellie, Christina, and all of the other fellows, and change, not only changing their narrative, but changing the narrative from each of the communities that they represent, that they love, that they're passionate about, and that they will go on to impact and change and uplift. So continue to put your dollars where your beliefs and your money and your mouth, or excuse me, your mouth and your beliefs are. And I really do hope to see this program continuously be funded and increase in funding, because there are more narratives that are out there that we need to change, that we need to empower. So that's my call to action, is take every single thing that Ellie and Christina and Nate share today, not just as this hour and, you know, some change that you spent out your day listening to these cool stories, but to actually put some action behind it.
Thank you so much, Syreeta. And I'm going to pass it with a minute left back to Kelly to just wrap us up, but just a huge amount of gratitude for you all. And my dog is making a little cameo.
All right. As the last slide comes up, I just want to congratulate and say thank you to all of the panelists for your awesome insights and everything that you shared. Thank you very much to Alicia for your excellent moderating. I know it can be so hard when you have all this talent on the panel, you get lost in the sauce, you know, you want to, you're like, oh, what's that? What's that? But you held the conversation in the group, and so we thank you. And for all of you out there, we thank each and every one of you for your attendance and participation and engagement in the conversation. Just a big reminder that the Closing the Gender Wealth Gap series is ongoing. So we definitely want your feedback. We want you to take the survey that's in the chat and let us know what stood out to you, what changes or shifts that you'd like us to make, because we're committed to staying in conversation with you. The conversation was recorded, so if you have friends and family or whomever who missed it, know that they can still join in and get the benefit of the conversation. We will also send out a resource list to everyone. So if you are interested in continuing to think about this and talk about this and engage in this topic, there's some suggestions for you for how to do that on the resource list. So be on the lookout for that in your email. We have our big second annual Gender Wealth Summit coming up in September, which is where we unpack all of this interesting data and start to come together and do some collective action around it. So we would love to see you all there. It will be in person. You'll get some details about that. And so be on the lookout for the registration for that. We have one more Closing the Gender Wealth Gap series in November. You can see the topic here. So before you close out the year, we've got one more big time for you, and then we'll launch a new series in 2024. So stay with us, continue to engage with us on social media, look on our website for more info, and just continue to join us in the fight. Thank you all, panelists. Thank you, moderator, and thank you everyone out there for tuning in. Have a great night.